Hi there. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our community meeting. Thank you for joining us. Although we're a few minutes late, we had a little technical difficulties, but thank you for being here today.
Muy buenos días, bienvenidos a la reunión y gracias por su paciencia. Tuvimos unas dificultades técnicas y les agradecemos su paciencia. Esta reunión será interpretada simultáneamente al español. Para escuchar en español, por favor haga clic en el icono del globo que se encuentra al pie de la pantalla y elija el idioma español. También puede hacer clic donde dice Mute Original Audio para silenciar el audio original y escuchar solo en español. Si quiere hacer un comentario o una pregunta, la puede escribir en español en el chat y nosotros la traduciremos al inglés. Gracias y bienvenidos.
Thank you all again for being here this morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick introductions. Good morning, I'm Deanna Chow. I'm the Assistant Community Development Director here for the City of Menlo Park. Joining me this morning are Calvin Chan, also with Community Development, and our consultants from the M Group, Christina Paul, Jeff Bradley, Sung Kwan, and Aaron Tao. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for being here for this important part of our housing element process, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Here is our agenda for this community meeting. I will provide an overview of the housing element. I'll go over the regional housing needs allocation numbers, provide an overview of the fair housing. I'll go over land use strategies, and after some questions, I'll go over next steps. Just in terms of process, the presentations are available on our public box drive, both English and in Spanish. And I just provided, let me put that to everyone, just provided the link to everybody. So I'll give you a minute to go to the public box drive and download the presentations. In terms of the flow of the presentations, I'll be pausing for a little bit after the end of each slide to give our Spanish interpreter some time to catch up. And thank you again for your patience. The state of California requires cities to update their housing element periodically. The housing element update is required to have allocations for both affordable and market rate housing. Housing elements need to be tailored for each agency with specific programs and policies. Housing matters because all types of housing is needed, and this is your opportunity to shape the future of Menlo Park. But before we go into some of the numbers, we would like to ask you a couple of questions. So we're gonna have an InstaPoll. So the first question is, do you live and or work in Menlo Park? Okay. Looks like we're still getting some answers. Give it another minute or so. It looks like 46% of the attendees live and work in Menlo Park. 15% work in Menlo Park. 31% just live in Menlo Park, and 8% is none of the above. How do we go to the next question? Oh, here's the next question. Do you rent or own your home? I'll give that a minute or so. Okay, it looks like 77% of the attendees own and 15% rent. 8% is neither. So that's the summary of the polls. Thank you for your responses. We'll have various polls throughout the presentation. So for every housing cycle, each agency is given an allotment of housing units that need to be planned for during that cycle. For the current cycle, 2015 to 2023, Menlo Park was required to plan for 655 housing units at various income levels. This table shows the current progress of housing entitlements and/or construction units during this cycle. As you can see, at very low, 64% has been complete. For low, 62% is complete. At moderate, 785% is complete, or above moderate, 785% is complete. And for moderate, only 8% is complete. So there's definitely some room for improvement in this category. Here's a breakdown of the income levels for San Mateo County. The area median income for a family of 4 is $149,600. So what does that mean in terms of people and jobs? Well, here are some examples in different income levels. So at extremely low income, it could be a senior living at home and a fixed income. For very low, it could be a secretary, single mom with a child. For low income, it could be an elementary school teacher and postdoc with 1 child. And at moderate income, it could be a tech worker with a stay-at-home spouse and 2 children. There is some variability in terms of what the salaries of a tech worker could have, but again, this is on average. As we plan for the next housing cycle, the Menlo Park's RHNA has increased, which is on par with the increase throughout the Bay Area. The Bay Area RHNA has increased by 235%, but the RHNA for Menlo Park has increased by 4.5 times. As you can see, it went from 655 units to 2,946 units. And the state of California recommends a 15 to 30% buffer, which is up to 3,830 housing units. Now let's talk about fair housing. Affirmatively furthering fair housing law was passed in 2018. This law requires cities to proactively address segregated living patterns and break down barriers to fair housing for all members of the community. This map is based on the census data, which shows the racially segregated pattern within the city. So as you can see here up in the right, this is the Hispanic Latino community, and it's very different from the rest of the city. The new 8-year plan for housing must show adequate new housing in high resource areas with access to good schools, jobs, and services. And this was not a requirement in the past housing element cycle. In addition to the segregation pattern, overcrowding is also an issue. In Menlo Park, Hispanic households have higher rates of overcrowding at 16% as compared to some of the other ethnicities. And if you look at housing prices, more than half of the homes in Menlo Park are selling for more than $2 million. And the availability of housing under 2 million drops off significantly as it goes lower and lower, where in the rest of the Bay Area, it's more of a bell curve. So what are some potential solutions? To address the need for 3,000 plus new homes, we have developed a number of draft ideas. At the center, we have reusing of fifth cycle sites and pipeline projects. And then there would be a variety of other strategies, such as placing housing in the downtown, along El Camino, use of religious facilities, accessory dwelling units, potentially looking at housing opportunities in single-family areas, and also looking at adding residential to commercial sites. Fifth cycle sites. So opportunity housing sites identified in the fifth cycle housing element will be carefully evaluated for use in the new sixth cycle. Some sites will need an increase in density, while other sites will need to allow housing by right, according to new state laws. Housing by right is ministerial review, or in other words, no discretionary review. And we have a question for you about this strategy. So if we can pull up the poll question. And so the question is, reusing fifth cycle sites requires ministerial review. How do you feel about reusing these sites? And so basically ministerial review is if a project is submitted to the city and it meets all the checklist items, then it's automatically approved.
So do you want to walk through the answers also?
Yeah. So the answers are, this is a good idea. We just need to establish strong requirements to ensure good projects. Or B, maybe this site would work for some sites, but not others. And C, we should avoid ministerial review whenever possible. And D, I'm not sure. Looks like the questions are in, so I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. So it looks like 40% of the attendees thinks it's a great idea. 20% thinks maybe this would work for some sites, but not others. 10% thinks we should avoid ministerial review as much as possible, and 30% are not sure. Thanks for your responses. So pipeline projects. Pipeline projects are defined as development projects that are either approved and or pending. The city may not be able to use all of these units because of varying income levels and the need to further for housing. From an equity perspective, housing needs to be provided throughout the city, particularly near good transit, schools, services, and jobs. Last year, the state of California passed AB 1851, which allows religious facilities, churches, synagogues, mosques, etc., to build housing to take place on up to half of the parking required for the facility. There are a number of religious facilities in the city of Menlo Park, and we'll take a look at what's reasonably likely for the cycle. In terms of commercial sites, there are a number of existing commercial properties throughout the city that do not currently allow residential, and these will be considered in detail as possible candidates for residential and or mixed-use opportunity sites. We'll also review the likelihood of these sites that could redevelop in the next planning period. And again, ideal sites would be close to transit and services. The other thing that we will look at is the downtown and El Camino plan area. And we'll look at sites specifically not identified in the fifth cycle. Again, for the downtown and El Camino, some of the advantages there is the proximity to Caltrain and the downtown services. But before we go through some of the other options, we'd like to ask a few questions, another couple of poll questions about these particular housing strategies. So the first poll question is, do you support the use of religious sites to accommodate affordable housing? So yes, not sure, no, and other. And I'll give it a minute for people to respond. Looks like the responses are done. So I'm going to end the poll. And here are the results. So about 75% of the attendees says yes, and about 25% says I'm not sure. Great. So the next question is, do you, oh wait, let's go to the next question. Do you support transitioning some of the commercial or industrial properties to affordable housing or mixed use? So the answers are yes, I'm not sure, no, and other. Okay, looks like the responses are in. So the answers are 80% said yes to supporting transitioning some of the commercial industrial areas, 10% said no, and 10% is other. And third question, do you support increased density and more housing along El Camino Real near downtown? So yes, I'm not sure, no, and other. Okay, looks like the responses are in the poll. Here are the results. So it looks like 77% said yes, 8% said I'm not sure, 8% said no, and 8% is other. Great. So we'll move on to accessory dwelling units. So new state law requires ministerial approvals of accessory dwelling units under a certain size. ADUs have been documented to be naturally affordable due to their small size. And there are many different ways to build an ADU, as you can see in this graphic. They can be built over a garage. They can be built in the back as a detached ADU. They can be an attached ADU. There could be a basement conversion or even a garage conversion. In terms of housing for single family areas, we're wanting to see if there's any community interest in this. Just to give you some context, if SB 9 passes, duplexes would be allowed in single family zones. In addition, a few larger cities are considering allowing fourplexes in single family areas. A possible solution for Menlo Park could be to allow more housing on corner lots. Lots over a certain size near transit, etc. So those are some of the possible ways in which we could allow for more housing in single family areas, and we would love your feedback. One of the reasons why we're looking into this is for the equitable distribution of housing. Here's a breakdown of the land uses in the city. So you can see just over 50% of the land uses in the city is residential. And then within the residential uses, just under 80% is single family. And so with that, we'd like to ask you a few more questions with some InstaPolls. And so the question is, do you think we should encourage small scale infill development in single family neighborhoods? Yes, that depends, or no. Looks like the answers are still coming in. Great. So it looks like 67% said yes, 25% said that depends maybe, and 8% said no. Next question is, do you think we should encourage small scale infill development in single family neighborhoods? Go to the next one. Sorry for the technical difficulty. Should Menlo Park focus on encouraging ADUs? Yes, that depends, or no. Okay, so it looks like 43% said yes, 43% said no, and 14%, 43% said yes, 43% said that depends, and 14% said no.
Hey, Sung, this is Jeff.
Yes.
Can we leave the results up a little longer? I think Cal is trying to make sure we get screenshots of all the results in real time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Should Menlo Park consider allowing small or medium multifamily buildings in single family neighborhoods? So A, sounds great. B, small scale on small lots, slightly larger for large lots. Small scale duplexes or triplexes only, no, and other. So it looks like 36% said sounds great. 36% said small scale on small lots, slightly larger on larger lots. 0 said small scale duplexes or triplexes only. 21% said no, and 7% said other. So I'll give it a minute to. So in summary, there are a variety of potential options out there, and each option can produce a variable amount of housing. For religious facilities, this variable amount of housing may be on the lower end, but we'll take a look at that just because there's only a certain amount of religious facilities in the city, and many of the religious facility sites are smaller, and so they may not be feasible. So we'll look into that. These are just initial strategies, and we are here to listen and would love to hear your ideas. With that, we'll transition to some more Q&A. I'll hand it over to Christina. But before we do that, if Calvin can explain just in terms of how the translation is going to work for questions being asked in Spanish.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. As Julie mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we do have the interpretation feature available. So if you are joining us today on a tablet or computer, if you haven't already seen at the bottom of your screen, there is a globe icon. If you click on the globe icon, you are able to pick the language of your preference that you would like to hear the presentation in. So if someone says something in Spanish, we will interpret it into English. And if someone says it in English, we will interpret it into Spanish. In this way, our intention is to ensure that everyone on this call can get a live real-time interpretation and be able to participate fully. If you have any questions about this feature, please feel free to input it into the chat. The chat is also located at the bottom of your screen. You can click the toolbar and type in a little question to us, and that will go to the host and panelists, and we are more than happy to assist you. I would just like to note that we have received a few questions from the chat already, and we will do our best to answer those in the time allotted. Thank you, everyone, again.
Hi, Sung, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I am Christina Paul with M Group. I'm here helping with this conversation. So we have a few questions that we wanted to enable you guys to answer verbally as well as through polling. And thank you so much for all of your responses that you've given us so far. So we actually have 4 questions. Apologies for the numbering mistake. But the first of those is if you could just let us know what 3 words or short phrases are that you have in mind that describe what affordable housing means to you. And you can type this into the chat and we will start to read them off. And maybe Calvin, while this happens, maybe you can work on assimilating some of those questions that came in earlier so that we can make sure to answer them at the end of this discussion. Does that make sense, Calvin?
Sounds great. As Christina mentioned, feel free to input your answers into the chat. Alternatively, if you would like to say it, you can also press the raise hand feature at your toolbar on the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us by phone, you can also press *9. So there are a variety of ways that we can receive your feedback. So the raise hand feature at the bottom of your toolbar, *9 by phone or through chat. So please participate. We really welcome your feedback.
Indeed, we do. All right, so thank you. Folks are starting to type their questions in, and we'll keep an eye out for those raised hands. So Nancy Stork lets us know that her thoughts are restitution for past discrimination and social justice. Jen Willison says essential worker housing, inclusive community, and low income housing. I think I'm interpreting that right, but if I get your comments wrong, then please do raise your hand and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts. Eric Burmeister says affordable housing, opportunity, equity, and challenge. Affordable housing equals opportunity, equity, and it is a challenge. Affordable housing from Barbara Gale is attainable for people who work in the city. Sue Connolly is concerned about high densities in the city. Brittany Baxter says that affordable housing is much needed, essential, and it helps our community to be complete. Adina Levin says that affordable housing is a diverse community with less commuting and more opportunities. Pam Jones says inclusion and equitable and education justice. And then Juanita Croft says affordable housing means having enough housing stock for residents of different income ranges. And folks who are on the Spanish interpretation channel, are you seeing or hearing any hands raised that we should include? I'm not sure how we hear from those folks on this channel. Not at this time. Okay, thanks very much. So we've got all of those, and we're going to save this chat. But is there anybody who wants to make any comments, or even if you have any questions about the earlier presentation, we can take those now. Please, I'll give you a second to raise your hands if you want to speak. All right, Eric Burmeister Why don't you go ahead and Calvin, are you going to be unmuting folks?
Yes, one moment. Okay, Eric, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
Terrific. My name is Eric Burmeister, and I'm a resident of Menlo Park. I also am the superintendent of the Menlo Park City School District. I am also a parent of 3 children, one of whom attends the Menlo Park City School District schools, and the others have graduated out. I want everybody to know before I share my comments that I'm speaking for myself at this point in time as a resident of Menlo Park, but I also am informed in my comments by being the superintendent of one of the school districts that's going to be largely impacted by whatever the housing element team comes up with. I want everybody to know that it is safe for me to say that our school board and our staff support housing, support the efforts of the housing element team. I personally am a member and supporter of Menlo Together, and I consider myself a proud YIMBY member of the community rather than a NIMBY member of the community. I understand on a very personal level the impacts that our current housing situation have on families as a result of being the host of a single mom and her 11-year-old daughter who 3 months ago could not afford to live in the area and are now living with us in our single family home here in Menlo Park. I get the challenge, but I need everybody to understand, especially city leaders and the M group, that growth is expensive and that there are downriver impacts of the conversations that we're having now that must be addressed. Our community needs to know the trickle-down costs, and our developers and city need to be prepared to pay and to provide land for the impacts on our schools. As I looked at what you shared earlier, all but one of the potential sites listed for growth are in the Menlo Park City School District. Those of you who are planning this need to know that our area is served by 5 school districts. And the politics behind those 5 school districts and the funding of those 5 school districts impacts the decisions that you are going to be making. We want housing, but everybody needs to understand that Menlo Park City School District is incredibly impacted by land use challenges. The district to our east has dramatically declining enrollment and at least 4 school sites that they rent or lease out to others. The district to our west also has declining enrollment, is a small school district and has 2 facilities that they rent out for additional income. Menlo Park City School District, however, in the middle, which most of this development is being considered to occur inside, has the largest elementary schools in San Mateo County. We have no room to grow. We do not have the ability to address the capacity that you all are considering in the terms of the development in our area. Now, I do not agree with what happened and created this situation, but I must say that I don't have the ability to solve the problem myself. Our board does not have the ability to solve this problem ourselves. Our city and the developers must be prepared to provide land to build more schools in the Menlo Park City School District and the finances to do so if we are going to add the housing that we are talking about at this time. I look forward to a call from the City of Menlo Park leaders and from the M Group so that we can sit down and discuss with you the challenges that must be front and center in any housing element plan moving forward. I also call on community members to reach out to me to join our soon-to-be developed Superintendent Advisory Committee on Housing Development and the Housing Element, which will begin next month. We want to work together with the community, with the developers, with city leaders, and with special interest groups regarding housing on both sides of the issue to make sure that we can accommodate all of the students who are going to be coming as a result of this increased development. Thank you.
Eric, thank you. That was super, super helpful for contextualizing all of this. And we really appreciate your engagement today and in reaching out to the city and the planning group so that we can really get into this conversation with you. Thank you. And I want to let everybody know we are all looking at a PowerPoint in front of us and we're having this discussion, but we're also recording, we're recording this meeting in general as a video, but we're taking notes on everything in a Miro board. So if we get into a broader discussion, I'll show you how we're writing down all of these ideas. Okay, I see Sue Connolly with her hand up.
Yes, I'm not sure if I should speak now, but thank you for the presentation and for the great information. I really appreciate it. As someone who grew up in the area and also a homeowner and business owner in Menlo Park, I am dreadfully worried about the rate of development, and especially with offices that has happened in Menlo Park, which was primarily before a residential community, which kind of things were in balance and we were able to kind of handle things like, you know, take care of the schools and make sure that the quality of life for everybody in the entire community was protected and maintained. My chief concern is that, and again, I think more to Eric's point, developers kind of come in and they pillage. You know, they build these massive out of scale developments. And right now I'm talking mostly about the office developments. And then they leave, and there are very few developer concessions and things that they have to pay for, yet we taxpayers have to bear the burden for all the infrastructure costs, because Eric mentioned vitally the schools, which I don't have kids of my own, but I feel very, very committed to protecting our next generation to make sure they have a shot to have a future. Yeah, and education is the way to do it. But also, with the water issues we have, the traffic, all the other things that are having very serious implications on quality of life right now for every single member of the community. So my question is, what are we doing to curtail the massive boom and also even proposed new booms of more offices, which then drives up the housing element requirement for housing? You know, it's a chicken to the egg. Actually, it's not. It's a sort of Damocles situation where, you know, the more offices we have, that's a major driver in increasing the housing element mandate that we have. And Menlo Park is breaking, if not already. So I just want to see what recourse we have, because, you know, SRI is now planning to put in 9 4-story buildings, which will be a much higher density of office workers. And with that office worker quantity, then it also drives up the housing element. And we have this huge deficit on affordable housing already. And everybody, you know, it's really something that people are in favor of affordable housing, but how it's implemented and the numbers and sheer density of what's being proposed is quite daunting. What are we doing to try to perhaps renegotiate the way Palo Alto did to get the numbers put down, you know, revised down to something that is more equitable for Menlo Park, given our size and boundary limitations? We just don't have a lot of land. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of answers that I can help point towards. And then maybe community development folks want to jump in on the office development. And then I think we will go through the rest of these questions because I really love this conversation. But I want to make sure that we can get through these questions and we can get to a more general conversation where folks can really give whatever ideas are floating around in your mind about housing and other kinds of development. So I see, Nancy, that you have your hand up, but let's do these last few questions and then we'll get into a more general conversation. So first, you know, as you all know, it seems like you're familiar. The city of Menlo Park was assigned a regional housing needs allocation, and that is the number of units of the housing units, homes, that's apartments or otherwise, that we need to plan for. And the city has elected, like most cities in the Bay Area, not to contest that, not to try to push that number down with the regional housing, with the folks who did that allocation. That's ABAG, that's the Association of Bay Area Governments. And this is something that is happening across the state. You know, cities, not only in the Bay Area, but in LA and San Diego and all over the place are seeing much, much higher assignments of affordable housing units than has been the case in the past. And so, you know, this is an issue, the issue of saying, hey, you know, we had to plan for many fewer units last time around. What happened is something that a lot of cities are addressing. And if Menlo Park pushed out some of those units in some way, they would need to go to a neighboring community. So we're all sort of trying to work on this as a region. We are not thinking currently about the office development. I heard your concern that if there's more office development, then we get a higher assignment of housing units. Deanna or Calvin, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about sort of the trend of housing or the trend of office development in the city and how that works with housing, or if that's something we should follow up on otherwise.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks, Ms. Connolly, for your comments. Yeah, so it is an ongoing conversation with development. We do have a number of projects currently on file with the city. I think there's a question here about how many housing units are on file right now. So we have about 3,200 housing units pending, and we also have a number of non-residential projects pending. So that is office, life science, hotel, and commercial as well. And so these projects reflect plans that were adopted years ago, one being the specific plan and the second being the most recent general plan update. So what is being proposed is typically consistent of the land use plans that were part of the city. Each of those do go through their own discretionary process. And so the conversations that you're having right now will be part of the conversations that we have as we review the plans for each of those projects. So we hope you continue to stay involved. You mentioned SRI, that is in its infancy. They are starting to develop plans for a new mixed-use campus redevelopment, looking at redeveloping their site with the same amount of square footage, but potentially, as you noted, an increase in some of the office density, depending upon the land uses that are selected for the site. So continue to stay involved. We encourage you to do that. And also, just as a side note, we do have information on the city's webpage to help keep residents informed of what the projects look like, what the projects are proposed, and where they are in the process. So thanks.
Yeah, and I see one question about total build out of that office space, and that would be in the city's general plan. So I don't know that we have that off the top of our head, or have, you know, what has been developed and what hasn't, but if you want to see that, then that's in the general plan. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Okay, so this is a polling question. And so we're going to have a poll pop up. The question is, where should new housing be located in Menlo Park? And here are a few different options that you can choose between. The first is a traditionally single detached house neighborhoods. Single, okay, that's a little bit awkward, but you know, that's where we have our single family homes. In accessory dwelling units, we talked about those. Those are granny flats, or you know, backyard flats, or a unit that can be above our garage, etc. On religious facility parking lots, in or near downtown or the Caltrain station, distributed equitably throughout the entire city, or on existing commercial properties or other. Please let us know what your top 3 choices are for these. I know that there are 20 members of the community who are attendees right now. And so we would really love for as many folks as possible to respond to this question. You know, this is a major one, because this is a this is one of the major questions that we're going to be asking as part of the housing element. I see there's a note that the religious parking lot option does not appear in the poll. Thank you very much for that. If that is one that you like, please mark other, and we'll make a note of that, and we'll give folks the opportunity to note that as well. And Calvin and Sung, I can't see how many folks have responded. And Calvin, I know that you want to capture the results. So why don't you let us know when you think it's a good time for us to close this poll? I know that it requires some thinking. It's harder than yes or no.
Thank you, Christina. And as Christina mentioned, that's correct that unfortunately the religious facilities option is left off of the poll pop-up. But if that is something that you would like to respond and choose that choice, please select the other option. You can also type in your response into the chat and we will collect your feedback in that way. As of this moment, we have about 70% participation. We'll give it about 10 more seconds and then I'll close the poll and share the results. Thank you, everyone.
All right. So let's make this as big as possible. All right, so thank you so much to the folks who responded to this question. 30% of folks liked the idea of having additional traditional single family housing. That's certainly what they're, a lot of the area has a lot of this. The challenge, of course, with this is finding more space for this kind of use. 14% of folks were interested or excited about accessory dwelling units. Of course, this will not add up to 100, right? Because people got to vote for 3, except for Eric. And Eric, I apologize that you didn't get to vote for 3. In or near downtown or the Caltrain station, 71%. So that's quite a few folks were excited about that. 86%, nearing 90%, were really interested in seeing housing distributed equally throughout the city. And that's really supported by our drive to affirmatively further fair housing, to give folks access to communities where they would have more opportunity for education and et cetera. 50% of folks were interested in seeing that housing on other commercial properties. And then we got 21% saying other, and that could have been those religious facilities, or it could have been other ideas. So just specifically on this question, okay, Nancy Stork said she voted for traditional single family detached, assuming that that meant adding duplexes to such neighborhoods. Thank you very much for that note. And Eric B, it looks like you can add 2 more choices in the poll, says Jeff. I'm not sure if that's possible since the poll is now closed. Okay, so does anybody want to talk about their other response specifically? If not, we're going to hold the kind of additional questions or additional comments until the end. Jeff, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Christina. I was just trying to suggest to Eric, he could include 2 additional responses in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
I messed that up.
we all, Zoom is an ever evolving practice for all of us. Okay. So we have Nancy Stork and Sue with their hands up. Specifically on this question, what were your comments? We'd love to hear them. Nancy, I know your hand's been up for a little while, so maybe you could go first.
Hi, my name is Nancy Stork. I'm a member of the vestry at St. Bede's Episcopal Church on Sand Hill Road. And I'm interested if you have thought about doing something that Palo Alto did, which is to allow the parking of RVs on religious parking lots on an ad hoc or emergency basis, or possibly a long-term basis, if that's being considered.
Hi, Nancy. This is Jeff with M Group. We did receive similar input from the Housing Commission, so that idea is definitely on our radar, and we'd like to reach out to the religious facility owners, operators, such as yourself, to get a better handle on how that could work.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sue Connolly, what are your thoughts on this?
What I'd like to propose is that there's more specificity on the answer D for future community input meetings, because in or near downtown is actually pretty vague. And what I've been hearing as a really great idea for affordable housing is are the city-owned parking lots downtown, which the parking lots are in bad shape already. And there's been a lot of discussion about getting those redone and fixed just for the hazards. But since it's city-owned, that becomes the perfect place because there's no cost for the actual land use for affordable housing to be built there, and also put in with other mixed-use type retail and a number of other things that will actually revitalize our very dead downtown. So I really think it's important to take question D in future meetings and in community input meetings and break it out, because in or near downtown is covering a massively huge area and it's not specific enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. Great comment. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. So this question is a springboard off of the last question. The question is, what type of housing would you like to see more of that we have already? This includes accessory dwelling units, single detached houses, duplexes, and triplexes. And this is where folks can drill down a little bit on the type of housing they might want to see in the areas we were talking about earlier. Small apartment buildings of 6 units or less, that would be 1 or 2 stories. Townhouses or row houses, those can go up to 2 or 3 stories. Multifamily housing, which could be 3 to 5 stories and include condos, apartments, senior housing. Sometimes there's veteran housing in there as well, or multifamily housing, larger buildings of 6 stories or more, including condos, apartments, and senior housing. Here again, you can select up to 3, everybody, so don't press submit before you've gotten all of your choices in. And then if you have other ideas, please do feel free to go ahead and add other. Cal, I will turn it over to you here again to kind of keep an eye on our response rate and let us know when you think it's time to close the poll.
Thanks, Christina. We have about 50% participation right now. We'll give it another 20 seconds or so if people can input their selections. As Christina mentioned, you have the ability to choose multiple options up to 3. If for some reason you are experiencing difficulties and not seeing the poll pop up, please feel free to input your feedback within the chat.
Okay, so we got 14 responses. Thank you to the folks who responded. And you can see the percentages of the folks who responded here, which favorite choices were. So I'm going to try to go through this in order of preference. Don't grade me on this, but over 50% of folks were really interested in seeing duplexes and triplexes. 50% of folks were interested in small apartment buildings up to 1 or 2 stories of 6 units or less. Again, 50% of folks were interested in 3 to 5 stories of multifamily housing. That would be condos, apartments, senior housing, and so on. And then we've got a few clustered around the 30% line. That's single detached homes and multifamily housing, significantly larger buildings that's 6 stories or more. Again, you're going to see condos, apartments, senior housing, and other kinds of affordable housing often integrated into those kinds of projects. 21% of folks were interested in ADUs, and that's really interesting. So it's interesting to kind of see that folks are leaning in both directions. It's interesting to see that an equal number of people were interested in single family homes that are interested in multifamily housing, but you'll see a cluster of folks who are interested in kind of smaller infill, like duplexes and triplexes, small apartment buildings, and then up to 5 stories. That's supported by 50% of folks. I did leave out townhomes, which from a scale perspective is kind of similar in that those are around 2 to 3 stories. All right. So let's go on to the next question. I want to make sure that we get through all of these so that we can get input on as many things as possible before folks need to go. Okay. This is our last question, so the numbering is a little sideways.
Yes, this is the last question. The others were poll questions.
Okay. So the last question that we want to ask, and then we're going to switch over to a Miro board so that we can kind of see all of this and have a larger discussion. The last question is, how can the housing element update best address fair housing? And so if you want to raise your hand, this is one where you can type into the chat, or you're very welcome to raise your hand. And this is specifically about fair housing. You know, when we think about fair housing, we think about, again, access to opportunity. If you live in a neighborhood where you don't have access to great outdoor space, you don't have access to great educational opportunities, et cetera, and you are disproportionately impacted often by sources of pollution, those folks are statistically less likely to thrive in various metrics. And so the question is, how can the housing element best address fair housing? This could be by distributing housing across the city, through focusing housing in particular neighborhoods where you think there's a lot of opportunity, that kind of thing. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
And just as a reminder, if you'd like to raise your hand virtually, it is at the bottom of your screen if you're joining by computer or tablet. And if you're joining us by phone, please press *9.
Thank you, Calvin. All right, so if this is the last slide, we can stop sharing the PowerPoint. And I can share a board where we can have a broader conversation. Okay, so the question at hand, I haven't seen folks on the panel. I can't now see because I'm sharing. I can't see who has their hands up. So maybe Calvin, you can be in charge of calling on folks. The question at hand is around fair housing, but if we don't have any comments on that specifically, you're very welcome to raise your hand at this point and mention any thoughts that you have about the fifth cycle sites. Those are the sites that we could reuse, but would generally have to reuse with ministerial review. That means they would not go to Planning Commission and they would not have design review. It's not that they would have no review, but planning staff would be responsible for using the standards and guidelines that city decision makers have put into place on housing. That includes for design, location, height, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what would be involved in the fifth cycle sites. Religious facilities, we have the note around potentially parking RVs on those sites, and I can zoom into any of these areas. If anybody wants to comment on commercial sites, on housing downtown, we have the comment around potentially using city-owned parking lots there, on ADUs, on housing in single-family areas. Any general comments, preferred housing types, or even locations for housing are welcome. And then we can also work on responding to some of those questions. It's hard to do the presentation, ask our plan questions, and respond to comments all at the same time. So we'll work on working all of that in now.
And Christina, we do have a comment from Pam Jones on this topic, and her suggestion is consider walking distance to transportation and services.
Great, thank you.
That's in the chat. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Jeff.
I do see that within our attendees, we have a few raised hands, and I will just call on them in the order that I see them on my screen, beginning with Adina Levin. Adina Levin, you have the floor.
Hello?
Hi, Adina, we can hear you.
All right, great. My name is Adina Levin, Menlo Park resident near downtown. And in terms of the siting issue, you see that in the previous housing element, basically all of those pipeline sites are north of 101. And so in the interest of a fair housing and like this is really an issue because the city of Menlo Park has historically been segregated, and the north of 101 area was traditionally redlined with where I'll leave that there. And so it would be important for fair housing and helpful for the city to have sites that are more spread out within the city, really favoring locations that are centrally located, closer to the downtown and Caltrain and services. And that would include things like the downtown parking lots, which would be fantastic. But also sites like the SRI and USGS sites as they are available. It would also be good for housing to have housing in other areas of the city. For example, if it's feasible, the Safeway strip mall lot up by Sand Hill, and also the idea of having a plex zoning throughout the city is a way of increasing fair housing while really having minimal effects. There's those things were made illegal. There's many of them throughout our city now, and they're very unobtrusive and pleasant. So that would be good. And the last point I wanted to make is that there's policies the city can do to help allow and enable less driving and less traffic congestion with the housing. And there's things that we can learn from other cities in the area that are doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. I will now call on Juanita Croft. Juanita, your microphone is unmuted. Please feel free to provide your comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to speak about it in terms of the voices of the community. I am from Belhaven. I have been in Belhaven for over 60 years. My family was impacted by the redlining that Adina referred to. And looking at your charts and so forth, it appears that the city has been consistent in allowing the housing to be driven by the community, the West Side community, with the Belhaven community having very little voice in any of it, but being most impacted by it. So one concern that I have as a resident is to ensure that we do not create a red line-like environment for the community of Belhaven with all of the housing and the big buildings and everything else being surrounding our community. Our community has been surrounded by manufacturing and all of that. And I think that needs to be kept forefront in terms of equity, how all of this is actually going to impact the neighborhood for the residents that have been there, especially those of us who've been there a long time. So I'm just concerned about impact being like redlining. And so as you look at the developments and all of that, kind of ask the questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Does it promote that in the city? I don't see much of that discussion going on in the city, but I think in terms of the housing element, it needs to be discussed.
Thank you, Juanita. Okay, the next person that I see on my screen with a hand raised is Nancy Stork.
Thank you again. Once again from St. Bede's Episcopal Church. When we looked into doing some affordable housing last year, most of the developers said, you need to put in 40 to 60 units to make it even feasible. And we don't have the space for that. I'm hoping that there's going to be more funding that would allow us on our parking lot, if we were to take 50% of our parking lot, maybe we could put in 10 or 20 units. Do you think there will be more funding for this level of development? And also, is it possible to maybe go in with like a religious facilities land that directly abuts to commercial land? Is there a way to maybe work together to open up some of this space that's really, as far as I can tell, just sitting there?
Sorry, I'm typing while
Oh, yeah.
while I'm listening.
Oh, sure.
So that's a really interesting question, and folks on the rest of the team, you know, feel free to jump in. Jeff, looks like you have some thoughts on that.
Yes, historically, the best funding sources cities had for affordable housing was related to the redevelopment agencies that were unfortunately abolished in 2011. So cities have had to scramble to try to recreate a consistent, reliable revenue stream, and Menlo Park is in that same category. So local sources of funding can be very difficult, but we are seeing more support for affordable housing at the regional and the state level with a variety of funding sources. So the housing element will be very thorough about documenting what those are, what they're available for, and encouraging cooperation between the city, property owners, and affordable housing developers to try to make those projects more feasible.
Thanks, Jeff. And if I could just add to that just quickly. So the city does have a pretty robust below market rate housing fund, which we receive funds from non-residential developments of a certain size must contribute to our BMR funding program, which we do a notice of funding availability, which allows for distribution to, say, for example, the creation of affordable housing. And so that might be an opportunity where partnering with an affordable housing developer to develop a portion of a site might be also a funding option. So we do our notice of funding availabilities generally no less than every 2 years.
Thank you, Deanna. And the next person I would like to call on is Brittany Baxter.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really great to see all the different things that the city is thinking about. I'm a little bit of a newer resident here, closer to the downtown area. I'm super excited to think about how we're planning to grow and expand over this next housing cycle. So I think, you know, many people here may have seen the recent climate report that came out. It's something that I'm thinking about a whole lot. And I think we have such a great opportunity here to make sure that our growth is both, you know, thoughtfully planned and more equitable. So especially, you know, around this downtown area where I live, I'm really excited for us to start to think about ways to add more housing near resources in a way that people don't have to drive. You know, nobody likes sitting in traffic, me included. You know, we're about 3/4 of a mile here from downtown, and we have found that to be such a great location for walking sometimes, but also hopping on e-scooters. We picked those up recently, you know, and that's a really great way to get around town and avoid traffic. And so I think with the right amount of density, so having people being able to live by schools and services and, you know, all the great things our town has to offer, we do end up having an easier time getting people out of cars. And I think a lot of the traffic that, you know, from what I've read and researched, the traffic that we see in the region is actually people who work here but have to live far away to commute to their jobs. So I end up chatting with a lot of people when I'm out and about here on the peninsula, and a lot of people have told me, you know, about their commutes, driving in, you know, 90 minutes or 2 hours from places further away where they can get affordable housing. And I am so excited about us being able to have a bit more of a complete community. So the people who would like to live here in the town where they work have the option to do so. And of course, to speak to some of the equity impacts that have been brought up before as well, definitely great for us to be able to allow more households here in the resource-rich downtown area, where it's not right by the highway. You know, we don't have the impacts of pollution, but it is easy to just get around town and take care of your daily needs without having to get into a car or being very far from shops and services. And I would just, you know, kind of close by adding that I think, you know, as someone who very recently has been especially in tune with kind of the cost of housing here, having just moved to the city, I find it really disheartening to see that a lot of the housing stock is right now being used for kind of more one-plexes, right? So houses that are $3 and $4 million are getting redeveloped into single family houses that are selling for $7 million. And why can't instead we use those sites to have, you know, a small multi-unit development, either within a single family neighborhood like mine, or elsewhere in the city. But, as those prices just spiral further and further out of reach, my friends and I are talking about how our own doctors are moving away because they can't afford to live here. And so while I think specifically carving out affordable housing is fantastic, and we absolutely should carve out some funding for very low income housing, I think we have underbuilt for so long that the fact that, households that would be very wealthy anywhere else can't afford to live here, it makes me a little bit concerned about just our ability to retain essential personnel all up and down the economic spectrum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany. The next person I would like to call on is Eric Burmeister.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the dialogue and being informed about what you guys are thinking about and having the opportunity to provide feedback. I want to, first of all, echo what Juanita Croft said earlier. Hi, Juanita. It's good to hear you. That I don't believe that that the portion of Menlo Park north of 101 should continue to bear the burden of this growth, particularly without the voices of the members of that community being able to participate in the process. I would also like to say that particularly as it relates to schools, but also just in general, our community, which is long and skinny, is sort of divided into 3 areas, and they can be kind of be defined by school districts. So you have the Ravenswood, Bellhaven area, you have the Menlo Park City School District area there in the middle, and then you have the Las Lomitas West Side. And one of the things that I think is really important to mention is that we're not talking a lot about the opportunity to develop on the west side. And so just as an example of the funding politics that are at play here, Las Lomitas School District, my understanding has this year their property taxes are increases are twice the rate of any other school district in the county of San Mateo, due primarily to the sale of 2 office buildings that house venture capital firms, largely on Sand Hill Road. Mind you, it brings in a ton of property tax, but it brings in not one single student. We need to be looking at creative, equitable opportunities to grow housing in areas that have a great deal of resource without any burden on the public infrastructure in that area. And when you look at that, that is on the west side of Menlo Park. So why are we not looking and talking about Sand Hill Road, Alameda de las Pulgas, and other areas to make sure that we get a truly equitable focus of this housing issue? The other thing that I'd like to say, and I'd like to sort of challenge some of the comments that sort of lend people to believe that the downtown is growth is not that impactful to the community and that it's ripe for growth. While that may be true, and while it may be resource rich in terms of resources for the resident, it is not resource rich in terms of those residents when they have kids. There are no schools in the downtown area. We used to have one. We pretty much gave the school site, it was Fremont School, to the city of Menlo Park in like the 70s or 80s. And Menlo Park City is going to have to really think about the fact of where are they going to find land for Menlo Park City School District to house all of these kids who are going to be coming into these moderate income family housing. We would love to have them, but we have to pay for them, and we have to have a school site for them. Remember, school sites by definition cannot grow past a certain number of students per acre of school site. Our school sites are the largest in the county, and it's because we have nowhere to grow. Menlo Park City School District saw a 50% increase in enrollment over the last 20 years because of all the growth that's already happened in Menlo Park City School District. The answer is multi-layered. It is not no housing, but it is planning for both paying for and providing land for us to have more school sites in the Menlo Park City School District if you want to grow in the downtown area. If you want it to be by transportation, we support it, but you have to provide the land and the financial resources to build schools. If you don't, what happens? we have to go out to the taxpayers again and ask for bonds and parcel taxes more and more and more to keep up with the desire to feed these developers who want to keep growing housing in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. The next person I would like to call on has a Zoom username of eminent domain.
Hello, thank you for entertaining my comment. I didn't know we were using real names on the Zoom call, so I just chose one at random when I was signing up. In short, my comment is pretty much summed up by my name. With the historically low interest rates and the exceptionally, the exceptional nature of the times, is it not possible that the city of Menlo Park could use eminent domain and essentially buy most of downtown and then do with it what Menlo Park wills? I've lived here for 3 years. My understanding is that a lot of the office buildings and a lot of the quote unquote low income or moderate income apartment housing around the downtown area is effectively just a cash cow for what amounts to a landed gentry of people who, for some reason or another, happen to own property here before the Bay Area blew up. So a lot of that is the nature of the situation, the ownership of the land, and the ridiculousness of how much a lot of these apartment buildings cost, as well as a lot of the downtown buildings. The fact that half of the storefronts in downtown Menlo Park are vacant because businesses can't afford the exorbitantly high rents. The fact that most of the buildings were built in the 1950s. This is patently absurd for one of the richest cities in the nation. So my question is, given that it's the richest city in the nation, given that we are literally blocks away from some of the wealthiest venture capitalist institutions in the land, is it not possible that Menlo Park could behave in some sense like those institutions and think a little bigger? Go out, get a huge loan, eminent domain, all of downtown, tear down all the buildings, build a school, build multi-use, multi-level, 4-story tall apartment buildings, create a place in downtown Menlo Park, whereas now it's sort of just a smorgasbord of mistakes from the 1970s and 80s in terms of architecture. You could unify it, create a unified vision of what the downtown could be. I just with this year and with the IPCC report that another commentator mentioned, the world is in some sense becoming extreme, and drastic times call for drastic measures. So I put this question to the board. Why not think a little bigger? Thank you.
Thank you. The next person that I would like to call on is Julian Cortella.
Hi there. This is Karen Grove, resident of Menlo Park, using my husband's Zoom account. I'm also just want to be clear that I am on the Housing Commission, but I am speaking just for myself as a resident. And I have, oh shoot, one of my comments I just lost, but one of them was about, in support of more housing in West Menlo Park. That's where I live. The Safeway parking lot potentially is an area that might work. And I know Nancy from St. Bede's mentioned an interest in her religious institution. But I also want to add, and I'm nervous because I know people are going to freak out, but I love walking in Sharon Heights Park around the duck pond. I love it. I see people with their dogs. I go there with my dog. However, there is a corner that is barren and has only, if it has any trees, they're eucalyptus trees, so they're not precious. And I think the city owns that land, and it's something we should consider. as the place for, especially for deeply affordable housing, because of the cost associated. And when we're talking about cost, if we want to build extremely low income housing and not on our public land, then we're going to have to put a lot of money into it. So although we do have some money in our below market rate fund, we did just distribute a bunch. And I don't know that we really have a very steady input into that fund ever since we started getting units. I'm getting super technical. Basically, I think we could absolutely use more funding for affordable housing in Menlo Park. I think Sharon Heights is definitely a place we should be looking. And I think we've mentioned the public land of the parking lot, and we haven't mentioned our parks. And parks are wonderful, and we need them, and we should have them, and we will have them. But I do think we need to look at them as a potential site for affordable housing. We can't ignore it because people are homeless. They're living in the fields and the marshes. So I just think it has to be on the table. We have to compare it to the cost to build on non-park land and make an informed choice. If we don't look at the public lands, including the parks, corners of it, on top of a library, et cetera, then we won't know how they compare. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we don't have any other raised hands at this moment, but I'd like to give everyone another opportunity. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to provide some feedback, we welcome you to raise your virtual hand, either at the bottom of your computer screen or tablet, press the raise hand feature, or if you're joining us by phone, please press *9. Okay, I'm going to call on Zoom username eminent domain followed by Sue Connolly. Zoom username eminent domain, go ahead.
What? Sorry about that. Had trouble unmuting. My name's Abe, by the way. You don't have to call me eminent domain. Anyway, no one had any comments on my proposition. Humor me. Is this like, why couldn't you do that?
I could dive sort of deeply into the legal history of eminent domain, but I feel like I think suffice it to say that has become more and more complex from a legal perspective as well as from an acceptability perspective. But does anybody else have any comments? Jeff, is this something that you have come across and had conversations about recently?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Thanks, Abe, for bringing up this interesting perspective. Generally in the planning field over the last 20 to 40 years, large scale redevelopment, so-called revitalization of areas that were considered obsolete or depressed or lacking in financial qualities that were desired by the market or the government have generally ended badly. And so as a profession, we've sort of moved away from the idea of taking over large areas of land and imposing a master plan. And areas that historically had been swept away are now valued as basically main streets. And Menlo Park, downtown Santa Cruz Avenue is definitely a traditional main street type of environment, small scale, individualistic. And so obviously there's opportunities there for change and evolution, but the idea of just taking it out completely would run counter to what would be considered good planning principles in this day and age, in my view, that's my personal opinion.
Well, thank you for humoring me. I mean, I in some sense don't agree with the premise of your comment or your rebuttal, but I don't want to get into a full-scale debate on it. I think it would be out of scope for the conversation at hand. But absent the sort of heavy-handed eminent domain deployment to solve some of the issues that the city has. Would the city consider, for instance, rent controls for the downtown area to make sure that landlords couldn't charge exorbitant amounts for the real estate? And is it not possible to deflate the housing bubble, so cause massive drop in property values by, say, limiting the amount that rent can be charged, especially in the downtown area? That might make it more affordable for new developers to come in and tear down the very old buildings and build new buildings.
Yeah, obviously, rent control is a powerful tool to control exorbitant rent increases during strong economic times like we see persistently here in the Bay Area.
I'm not talking about rent increases. I'm just talking.
Right, but I accept the premise that rent control can limit, it can make housing more affordable, but then it also runs into the concern that in some case studies, rent control has led to a documented decrease in the production of new housing, and so there's a balance there, and a pretty serious policy debate around the relative merits and effects of rent control. And usually those things are instituted on a community-wide basis rather than a smaller area within a city. And we can look at examples of where that's been done and some of the restrictions around that coming from the state. But that is definitely a policy topic worthy of discussion.
Thank you, Jeff and Abe. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have about 20 minutes more that we have scheduled for today. So I would like to move on and call our next attendee, Sue Connolly. You have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate just the thoughtful comments from the people who are hosting this, and also from the people who are participating in this. It's a multi-leveled and layered issue. But one of the things I really think is so vital in the planning process is that we really look at what we're doing with the addition of office space and what's being currently done with office space. It's my understanding, and I'm no expert by any means here, but with companies like Facebook or other ones that don't generate revenue, it doesn't really add much to the coffers for the city for the things that these office developments are creating, namely traffic, water, infrastructure, police, fire, and then of course schools. So I think that, I know the idea of an office building moratorium has been kind of summarily shut down a bunch of times, but I think we really need to look at just hitting the pause button at least until we can get this affordable housing imbalance taken care of before we start creating more and more problems, which, given that we're in a drought and we have severe water limitations already, that we're putting in massively huge new developments. And especially with these offices, they're not generating sales tax revenue for the city. So more to Eric's point is, with VCs and other ones where we can look and say, hey, this will actually help the city and help offset the infrastructure and the negative impacts of all this development. But to really rethink this and make sure that we limit office space, put a pause on it right now, and then also look at the nature of the offices so that they're actually going to be contributing to the community rather than to the detriment, which they currently are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. The next person I would like to call on is Adina Levin.
Hi, I have a process question because it seems like there have been a lot of good issues that have been raised regarding the policies associated with the housing element. So one of those questions is funding and the desirability of having more funding for more deeply affordable housing and how that funding might be raised. There was another a good question about tenant protections and the role of those in preventing displacement and the policy nuances that might be able to provide tenant protection with fewer of the side effects. That's a policy issue, worthy of robust consideration. Concern about traffic and ways of doing development that can reduce the transportation impact and climate impact of transportation, as well as schools, how to find school sites. Do we have developments large enough like SRI that might be able to provide school sites? Is it possible to have schools that are taller than 1 or 2 stories to accommodate schools? Like a range of how do we accommodate schools associated with housing? When in this process will there be consideration of these policy issues to have the policies that can really help us to accommodate housing for people of all income levels in a way that furthers fair housing and opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really great question. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about what our policy development process is, and then also how people can find out more information about upcoming events like website and that kind of thing?
Sure. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Adina, for that comment and suggestion. We have a pretty strong focus right now on the housing site strategy, for the simple reason that that is the longest lead time in terms of preparing some of the environmental reports and the fiscal impact reports that have been mentioned tonight, this morning, as part of this process. So that's sort of a timing issue for us, is to get some clarity on the site strategy, so the environmental team can go off and do their analysis, and the fiscal impact team, which will be looking at fiscal impacts, not just to the city itself, the general fund, but also to the school districts and other special districts. And that's come up this morning as well. Once we get that ship launched towards the end of this year, then we'll have more time to focus on pure policy issues within the housing element. And of course, we're also updating a safety element and creating an environmental justice element for the first time. And that'll really be the major topic of the next meeting on August 26th. Hopefully you can join us and also help us spread the word to your friends and neighbors and other interested folks. There'll be another virtual Zoom meeting like this, very interactive, and that'll be an opportunity to talk at that policy level that Adina was talking about, because we are focusing on sites now, so that we can, like I said, do some of the follow-on analysis around that. The other policy things, we have a little more leeway. A lot of the pure policy topics don't always have a direct physical impact on the environment, and so we can let those ride for a little bit and have more community engagement and discussion around those as we go through this process this year and next year. And then in terms of additional resources, we invite everyone to track to the city's website, where there's a City of Menlo Park /housing element. It has all of our meeting calendars, all of our documents. You can sign up for regular email updates of activities, so that we can continue to get everyone's voice on these important issues for all aspects of this project, which are multifold, as we've talked about. Thank you.
Calvin, anybody else have their hands up, or would anybody else like to raise their hands?
So we don't have any other hands raised at this moment. I think I want to really thank everyone for taking the time in your Saturday morning to join us today. And as Christina mentioned, this meeting is being recorded in both English and Spanish. So these videos, as well as the presentation slides, will be available on our project website. I just pasted into the chat our main project website for the housing element. So it's menlopark.org/housing element. Please feel free to visit that site for the latest information regarding events as well as other ways to stay connected to the project. Throughout this project, we really want to hear from the community, and we really thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Calvin. Sung, do you want to share those last PowerPoint slides? I see a note on that, just so that people can see this.
Yes, just a couple of housekeeping items. So the community survey is up and it's available in English and in Spanish. So here are the links for those. And we would like everyone to fill out the survey and have them completed by August 29th. So I'll just hold on that slide for a minute. Feel free to click on the slide and pull up the link so they can fill out after this, this presentation or whenever you would like to fill out this survey. And here are some of the next steps. So we will be having the community meeting, as Jeff mentioned, on housing equity, safety, and environmental justice on Thursday, August 26th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then we'll be having a couple of pop-ups in the farmers market and in Belhaven, and they'll both occur on Sunday, August 29th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we'll have some other meetings in September and in October. We'll be moving forward with the site selection strategy meetings, and then also some of the policy meetings as well. So those are upcoming and will be scheduled soon. So just hold on this so you can take a look. And as Jeff and Calvin mentioned, if you'd like to send an email to the city, you can click here to send an email, and you can also sign up for updates as well on the webpage. Thank you so much for your time and commitment. If you have any last comments or thoughts, we'd be happy to hear them. But thank you for spending your morning with us.
Thanks, everyone. Sung, could we leave the meeting open a few minutes so people want to click on the survey links in the chat appear to be clickable, as opposed the PowerPoint doesn't appear to be clickable, but the chat links do, I think. Yeah, those work.
I can bring those up. That in the chat. One moment. Looks like it's in the chat already. Let's.
Eric Burmeister, I see that you have your hand raised. Go ahead, and if you have a question, we'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just have a thanks and a suggestion. First of all, thanks again for doing this. And my suggestion is that maybe you guys consider extending the deadline of the survey. What we find in our world of at least residents who have school-age kids is that their attention to issues as important as this are not very focused in the month of August, because there's so many other things that are happening. People are coming back from vacation, they're not checking their emails, and then when they do, they're getting ready to start up school. And so if you want a more broad cross-section of input, you might decide as you near the deadline to extend it for another week or two, as Labor Day kind of is the demarcation in our society of people refocusing on domestic items.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are very happy that you could take time out of your weekend to visit with us and chat with us. Deanna, is there any last comments you would like to provide before we close out this meeting?
I think just to echo your comments, thank you everyone again for participating here this evening, or again this morning, and we look forward to your continued participation, our continued community conversation. There are going to be different events, different opportunities to provide feedback. As Jeff mentioned, today we're just looking at some of our potential land use strategies. We'll be having policy conversations. Some of the issues raised today about the environmental topics, we'll be just having discussions around our environmental impact report. So throughout this 1.5 year long process, we'll be having multiple avenues for community feedback, community conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again and hope you have a nice weekend. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.